The chandelier light caught her eye, first crystal fragments casting rainbows across the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. Flora Wilson tucked a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear, feeling distinctly out of place among Philadelphia's elite at the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. She wouldn't normally be here, but as the hospital's newest pediatric physical therapist, attendance had been strongly encouraged by her supervisor. Flora smoothed down her emerald dress, purchased secondhand but elegant enough to pass in this crowd. She'd spent the last hour making awkward small talk with wealthy donors whose names she'd never remember, smiling until her cheeks hurt. "You look like you could use this," said a voice beside her. Flora turned to find a waiter offering a flute of champagne. She accepted it gratefully. "Is it that obvious I don't belong here?" she asked with a small laugh. "Not at all," he replied, "but everyone needs a little liquid courage at these things." As the waiter moved on, Flora took a sip and let her gaze wander across the room. That's when it happened. Through a momentary parting in the crowd, she locked eyes with a man standing near the far wall. He was tall, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that accentuated broad shoulders. Dark hair, styled with just enough product to look effortless. But it was his eyes that captured her, intense, observant, the kind that seemed to see right through pretense. Even from across the room, Flora felt an unexpected jolt, like touching a live wire. For 3 seconds she counted them in her thundering heartbeat, neither looked away. Then someone stepped between them, and the connection broke. When Flora could see that spot again, he was gone. On the other side of the ballroom, Connor Flynn slipped away from his position against the wall. 29 years old and CEO of Flynn Pharmaceuticals, one of the hospital's biggest donors, he was used to being the center of attention at events like these. Tonight, though, he'd been content to observe from the periphery until he'd seen her. The woman in the emerald dress stood out, not because she was trying to, but because she wasn't. In a room full of practiced smiles and calculated charm, her momentary discomfort seemed refreshingly genuine. When their eyes had met, Connor had felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a spark of genuine interest. "There you are," said Richard Townsend, the hospital's development director, clapping Connor on the shoulder. "I've been looking all over for you. There are some board members dying to discuss the new research wing." Connor nodded, reluctantly turning away from his search for the woman in green. "Lead the way." For the next hour, Connor was trapped in conversations about funding allocations and naming opportunities. He nodded at the right times, made the appropriate commitments, but his thoughts kept drifting back to those few seconds of eye contact across the room. Meanwhile, Flora had found herself cornered by an elderly trustee with an endless supply of stories about his grandchildren. "And then little Timothy, he's only 4, looked the doctor straight in the eye and said, 'Excuse me,'" interrupted a smooth voice. "I believe this is our dance." Flora turned to find herself face to face with him, the man from across the room. Up close, his eyes were even more striking, a clear blue-gray that reminded her of the ocean on a stormy day. "Oh," she stammered, caught off guard. "I don't think I promised the next dance to Miss Wilson," he said to the trustee, who beamed and waved them off. Before Flora could protest, the man had taken her hand and was leading her toward the dance floor. "I don't recall making that arrangement, mister," Flora said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Flynn, Connor Flynn." His hand was warm against her lower back as they assumed the position for a waltz. "And no, we didn't arrange it. Consider it a mutual rescue operation. You looked like you needed saving from that conversation as much as I needed an excuse to escape the board members." Flora should have been annoyed at his presumption, but found herself smiling instead. "Flora Wilson, and thank you for the rescue, though I'm not much of a dancer." "Follow my lead," Connor said, guiding her into the waltz as the orchestra began a new piece. "You work at the hospital." "How did you know? You're not one of the usual society faces, and you've been talking to the medical staff more than the donors. Plus, you actually seem to care about the hospital's mission, not just the open bar." Flora laughed, relaxing into the dance. "Guilty as charged." "I'm a pediatric physical therapist, just started 3 months ago. Helping kids recover from injuries and surgeries." among other things. Some of my patients have congenital conditions or developmental delays. The goal is to help them achieve their best possible physical function and quality of life. Connor nodded, skillfully guiding her through a turn. Important work. It is, Flora agreed, though I admit these charity functions aren't exactly my natural habitat. I'm more comfortable in gym clothes than evening wear. You could have fooled me, Connor said, his eyes briefly taking in her dress. You look stunning. Flora felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thank you, and what about you, donor, board member? Something flickered in Connor's expression. Something like that. Before Flora could press further, the music ended. Connor's hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. Thank you for the dance, Miss Wilson. Flora, please. Flora, he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. I hope we'll have a chance to talk again before the evening ends. With that, he disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Flora standing on the dance floor, wondering why her heart was beating so fast from just one dance. Connor made his way to the bar, ordering a Scotch neat. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so immediately drawn to someone. Flora Wilson was beautiful, yes, but Philadelphia was full of beautiful women. It was her authenticity that had captured his attention, the way she spoke about her work with genuine passion, how her smile reached her eyes. Quite the dance partner you found, commented Eliza Harding, the hospital's chief of staff, as she joined him at the bar. Flora Wilson? Yes, she's refreshing. Eliza raised an eyebrow. She's also one of our newest staff members, excellent therapist. The children adore her. I can see why, Connor murmured, his eyes finding Flora across the room. Connor, Eliza said, her tone suddenly serious. Be careful there, she's not part of your usual world. Maybe that's exactly what I need, he replied, finishing his drink. Across the ballroom, Flora had found refuge with a group of hospital colleagues. Did I just see you dancing with Connor Flynn? Whispered her friend Jess, an ER nurse. Is that significant? Flora asked, confused by her friend's wide-eyed expression. Jess stared at her. You're joking, right? Connor Flynn, as in Flynn Pharmaceuticals, the company that just pledged $20 million to the new children's wing. He's only one of the youngest pharmaceutical CEOs in the country. Flora nearly choked on her champagne. Wait, he owns Flynn Pharmaceuticals. I thought he was just... I don't know, some trustee's son or something. He inherited the company from his father 4 years ago and has doubled its value since then. Forbes just featured him in their 30 under 30 list. And you, Jess poked Flora's arm, just spent 10 minutes in his arms. Half the women in this room would kill for that opportunity. Flora glanced across the room, catching Connor in conversation with the hospital's chief of staff, a CEO, of course. That explained the perfectly tailored suit, the easy confidence. It was just a dance, Flora muttered, though even as she said it, she knew it had felt like something more. The evening continued, with Flora making a conscious effort not to look for Connor in the crowd. Just after 11, as the event was winding down, she decided to slip away early. She'd done her duty, made an appearance, and now all she wanted was to kick off her uncomfortable heels and curl up with a book. Flora was waiting for the elevator when a familiar voice called her name. Leaving so soon? Connor asked, joining her in the marble-lined lobby. It's been a long day, she explained. My patients were especially energetic this afternoon. Connor smiled. I can imagine. Would you like a ride home? My driver is just outside. Flora hesitated. That's very kind, but I can't accept. I barely know you. Fair enough, Connor conceded. But I'd like to change that. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? The elevator doors opened, providing Flora a moment to collect her thoughts. A date with Connor Flynn, a pharmaceutical CEO who moved in circles so far removed from her own. I don't think that would be a good idea, she said finally. We're from different worlds, Mr. Flynn. Connor, he corrected. And different worlds can sometimes offer the most interesting conversations, don't you think? Flora stepped into the elevator. Good night, Connor. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of his expression, not disappointed or angry, but determined. Like a man who wasn't used to hearing the word no. The following Monday, Flora was working with 6-year-old Lily, who was recovering from surgery to correct a club foot, when there was a knock at the therapy gym door. "Delivery for Flora Wilson," announced a courier, carrying an elegant vase filled with emerald green orchids. Flora thanked him, setting the flowers on her desk before returning to Lily's exercises. It wasn't until her lunch break that she had a chance to read the card. "Green, like your dress. Different worlds or not, I'd still like that dinner. Connor." Flora tucked the card away, ignoring the curious looks from her colleagues. That evening, after much deliberation, she sent a text to the number included with the flowers. "The flowers are beautiful, but I meant what I said. I appreciate your interest, but I don't date clients or donors." "It's a professional boundary I need to maintain." Connor's response came within minutes. "Not a client, as I'm fortunately quite healthy. And while Flynn Pharmaceuticals is a donor, I'm asking you to dinner as Connor, not as a CEO. One meal, no pressure." Flora stared at her phone, trying to ignore the flutter of excitement in her stomach. One dinner couldn't hurt, could it? Friday, 7 p.m. "Nothing too fancy," she replied before she could change her mind. When Friday arrived, Flora spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. Nothing too fancy was relative when dining with a CEO whose watch probably cost more than her monthly rent. She finally settled on a simple blue dress, casual enough for a neighborhood bistro, but elegant enough for whatever upscale restaurant Connor might have chosen. At precisely 7 o'clock, her buzzer rang. Instead of sending his driver, Connor had come himself. He stood in her apartment building's shabby entrance hall looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine in dark jeans and a charcoal button down. "You look beautiful," he said, a genuine smile warming his features. "Thank you," Flora replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up pretty well yourself." "I made reservations at Luciano's if that works for you. It's Italian, not too formal." Flora nodded, relieved. Luciano's was upscale but not intimidatingly so. During the short drive, Connor asked about her week, listening attentively as she described her patient's progress. At the restaurant, the maitre d' greeted Connor by name, leading them to a secluded corner table. "So," Flora said after they'd ordered, "tell me about yourself, and I mean you, not your company." Connor looked surprised, then pleased. "That's refreshing. Most people I meet can't wait to talk business." He took a sip of wine. "I grew up here in Philadelphia, only child. My father started Flynn Pharmaceuticals when I was a baby. My mother was an art professor at Penn. She's the one who insisted I get a well-rounded education instead of just business courses." "What did you study?" "Chemical engineering at MIT, then an MBA at Wharton. But my mother made sure I took plenty of literature and art history classes along the way." A shadow crossed his face. "She died when I was in graduate school. Cancer. That's part of why our oncology research division is so important to me." Flora reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. "I'm sorry." Connor turned his palm up, catching her fingers in his. "What about you? What brought you to pediatric therapy?" Over their meal, Flora told him about growing up in Pittsburgh with 3 sisters, her college swimming scholarship, and the knee injury that had introduced her to physical therapy. "After experiencing what good PT could do, I knew that's what I wanted to do for others," she explained. "I did my rotation in pediatrics and fell in love with it. Kids are the best patients. They don't complain as much as adults, and they're so resilient. That must be incredibly rewarding," Connor said, "and challenging." "It is both," Flora agreed, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything." As they lingered over dessert, Flora realized that 3 hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Connor was nothing like she'd expected. Despite his wealth and position, he was thoughtful and attentive, asking questions about her life with genuine interest. When they finally left the restaurant, the night had turned chilly. Connor slipped his jacket around her shoulders. "May I walk you home?" he asked. Flora nodded, enjoying the warmth of his coat and the subtle scent of his cologne. They strolled slowly through the city streets, their conversation flowing easily. At her door, Connor handed back her purse, which he'd been carrying. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Flora." "So did I," she admitted. "Much better than I expected," Connor laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. Instead, Flora found herself rising on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle, questioning, his hand lightly cupping her cheek. When they parted, Flora's heart was racing. Good night, Connor. Good night, Flora. I'll call you tomorrow. True to his word, Connor called the next day, and the next. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm: dinner dates after Flora's shifts, Sunday morning walks in the park, texts throughout the day sharing small moments of their lives. Flora learned that beneath Connor's polished exterior was a man who worked tirelessly because he believed in his company's research, who visited his father in a memory care facility every week, who could quote Shakespeare as easily as he could discuss market trends. Connor discovered that Flora's apparent simplicity masked a complex woman with a quick wit, a passion for her patients, and a stubborn streak that both frustrated and fascinated him. Their worlds were different but complementary. Connor introduced Flora to symphony performances and art exhibitions she would never have attended on her own. Flora showed Connor the joy of impromptu ice cream cones and pick-up basketball games at the public courts. 6 weeks into their relationship, Connor invited Flora to accompany him to a pharmaceutical conference in New York. "It's mostly boring speeches and networking," he warned. "But the hotel has an amazing spa, and I thought maybe we could stay the weekend, see a Broadway show." Flora hesitated. They'd carefully kept their relationship private, mindful of the hospital's donor-staff dynamics. A weekend away together would signal a significant step forward. "I'd love that," she finally said. The conference itself was as dry as Connor had warned, but Flora found herself fascinated by glimpses of Connor in his professional element. On stage, delivering a keynote address, he was commanding and articulate. In networking sessions, he moved with easy confidence, respected by industry veterans twice his age. "You're really good at this," Flora commented as they rode the elevator to their suite after the first day's sessions. Connor loosened his tie. "Good at what?" "All of it, leading. Connecting with people, you make it look effortless." "Trust me, it's not," he said, pulling her close. "But having you here makes it easier." Their suite offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, with amenities Flora had only seen in magazines. That night, as they lay tangled in the luxurious bedsheets, Flora voiced the concern that had been nagging at her. "Sometimes I wonder what you see in me," she admitted quietly. "You could be with anyone: models, heiresses, women who understand your world." Connor propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with serious eyes. "Do you know what I was doing the night we met, before I saw you?" Flora shook her head. "I was counting the minutes until I could leave without offending anyone. Those events, that world you think I belong in, it's exhausting, full of people who see me as a connection, an opportunity, or a bank account." He traced her cheek with his fingertips. "Then I looked across the room and saw you, someone real, someone who cares about her work, not her image. Someone who challenges me, surprises me, makes me laugh." He leaned down to kiss her softly. "I'm not with you despite our different worlds, Flora. I'm with you because of them." The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of Broadway shows, Central Park walks, and room service breakfasts. By the time they returned to Philadelphia, something had shifted between them. What had begun as an unexpected attraction had deepened into something neither had anticipated. Over the next 2 months, their relationship continued to flourish, though not without challenges. Connor's schedule often included last-minute trips or late nights at the office. Flora's work was emotionally demanding, leaving her drained after particularly difficult cases. But they made time for each other, prioritizing their connection even when it would have been easier to drift apart. Then came the hospital's budget crisis. A major donor had pulled funding, leaving several programs at risk, including Flora's pediatric outpatient therapy initiative for low-income families. Flora arrived home one evening to find Connor waiting outside her apartment building. "Hey," she said, surprised, "I thought you had a board meeting tonight. It ended early. Can we talk?" Flora nodded, leading him upstairs. Once inside, Connor didn't waste time. "I heard about the funding issues at the hospital." Flora sighed, collapsing onto her sofa. "It's a disaster. We may have to cut the outpatient program completely. These kids, some of them, have been making so much progress. Without consistent therapy, they'll lose ground." Connor sat beside her, taking her hand. "What if Flynn Pharmaceuticals covered the shortfall?" Flora stiffened, pulling her hand away. No, absolutely not. Why not? We donate to the hospital anyway. This would just be redirecting some funds. Because this isn't about Flynn Pharmaceuticals, Flora said, standing up. This is about us, about you trying to fix a problem for your girlfriend. Connor frowned. Would you rather the program be cut? Those kids lose their therapy. Of course not, but I won't use our relationship that way. Flora ran a hand through her hair in frustration. Don't you see, from day one, I've worried about the imbalance between us, your wealth, your influence. If I start accepting your financial solutions to my professional problems, where does it end? This isn't charity, Flora, it's practical. The hospital needs funding. Flynn Pharmaceuticals has money earmarked for community health initiatives. It makes sense. To you, maybe. To me, it feels like crossing a line. Connor stood, his expression hardening. So your pride is more important than your patience. The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Flora looked as though he'd slapped her. That's not fair, she said quietly. And the fact that you would say that shows you don't understand me at all. Flora, I didn't mean, I think you should go. Connor opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Okay, we both need to cool off, we'll talk tomorrow. But tomorrow brought no resolution, nor did the day after. Their text exchanges were stiff and formal. When they finally met for coffee a week later, the distance between them felt insurmountable. I'm sorry for what I said, Connor told her. It was unfair and untrue. Thank you, Flora replied, stirring her latte without meeting his eyes. But it highlighted something important. We approach problems differently. You see a financial solution and want to implement it immediately. I worry about the ethical implications, the appearances, the precedent it sets. Those are valid concerns, Connor acknowledged. But isn't the outcome what matters most? The kids getting the therapy they need, Flora finally looked up at him. The ends don't always justify the means, Connor, and sometimes the right decision isn't the easy one. They parted without resolving anything, both frustrated by their inability to find common ground. 2 days later, Flora was called into a meeting with the hospital administration. To her shock, they announced that an anonymous donor had provided funding specifically for the pediatric outpatient program, with the stipulation that the hospital match a percentage of the donation through their own fundraising efforts. Flora knew immediately who the donor was. Part of her wanted to be angry, but the structure of the gift showed that Connor had listened to her concerns. By making it anonymous and requiring the hospital to contribute as well, he'd removed any appearance of special treatment while still helping the children who needed it. That evening, she found Connor waiting outside the hospital. Before you say anything, he began, I know you didn't want me involved, but this way there's no connection to you. No one knows it was Flynn Pharmaceuticals except the CFO, and he's bound by the confidentiality agreement. Flora studied his face, the hopeful uncertainty in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. You made it anonymous. Yes, and added the matching requirement to ensure the hospital has skin in the game. Yes, it's not a handout, it's a partnership. Flora took a deep breath. I appreciate that you tried to address my concerns, but you still made a unilateral decision about something we were actively disagreeing about. Connor ran a hand through his hair. I know, and if that's unforgivable, I'll accept that. But those kids needed help now, not after we figured out our relationship dynamics. Flora was quiet for a long moment. I'm not saying it was unforgivable. I'm saying we need to talk about how we make decisions together, how we balance your resources with my independence. How we navigate these different worlds we come from. Relief washed over Connor's face. So we're still in us, still a we, despite herself, Flora smiled. We're a work in progress. They spent that night really talking about their fears, expectations, and boundaries. Connor admitted that his impulse to solve problems with money came from growing up with a father who showed love through financial support, rather than emotional presence. Flora acknowledged that her resistance to accepting help stemmed from years of financial struggle and a fierce need to prove her self-sufficiency. I'm not trying to buy your affection, Connor told her as dawn broke outside her apartment window. I just want to use what I have to make your life better. And I don't want to be another person who values you for what you can provide, Flora replied. I fell in love with you, not your bank account. Connor froze. What did you just say? Flora replayed her words in her mind, then blushed. I said I fell in love with you. The smile that spread across Connor's face was like sunrise. Say it again. I love you, Connor Flynn. Despite our different worlds, despite your stubborn need to fix everything, despite he cut her off with a kiss, pulling her close. I love you too, Flora Wilson. So much it terrifies me. In the months that followed, they learned to navigate their differences with greater understanding. Connor consulted Flora before making decisions that affected them both. Flora became more open to accepting the occasional luxury without feeling like it compromised her independence. 6 months after their reconciliation, Connor took Flora back to the hospital gala where they'd first locked eyes across the crowded room. It feels different this year, Flora commented as they entered the ballroom. Less intimidating. That's because you belong here now, Connor replied, guiding her through the crowd with a hand at the small of her back. Everyone knows who you are, the physical therapist who turned the pediatric outpatient program into one of the hospital's success stories. It was true. With the secure funding, Flora had expanded the program, gathering data that demonstrated remarkable outcomes for participants. Her presentation to the board the previous month had received a standing ovation. As the evening progressed, Connor seemed increasingly distracted. Is everything okay? Flora asked as they moved to the edge of the dance floor. You seem nervous. Do I? Connor took a deep breath. Maybe because I'm about to do something terrifying. Before Flora could question him further, he was guiding her toward the exact spot where they'd first seen each other a year earlier. Connor, what he took both her hands in his. 1 year ago, I was standing over there, he nodded toward the far wall, watching a woman in an emerald dress who seemed refreshingly real in a room full of pretense. When she looked at me, I felt something I couldn't explain, like recognition, like coming home to a place I'd never been before. Flora's heart began to race as Connor continued. I didn't know then that you would challenge me, support me, make me laugh, drive me crazy, and ultimately change my entire world. He reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee. Flora Wilson, I don't want to navigate different worlds anymore. I want to build one world together. Will you marry me? The ring he held was a simple emerald surrounded by diamonds, elegant but not ostentatious, exactly to Flora's taste. Tears sprang to Flora's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. As Connor slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to embrace her, the room erupted in applause. They turned to find the entire gala watching them, hospital staff, board members, donors, all celebrating their moment. I hope you don't mind the audience, Connor murmured in her ear. I wanted to propose in the exact spot where our story began, Flora laughed through her tears. It's perfect, just like that first look across the room. Just the beginning, Connor promised, drawing her close for a kiss as camera flashes captured the moment when two different worlds became one. A year later, they were married in a ceremony that reflected their merged lives, elegant, but not extravagant, held in the hospital's healing garden where many of Flora's young patients could attend. Connor's father, having a rare moment of clarity, walked Flora down the aisle in place of her own father who had passed years before. Flora continued her work at the hospital, eventually becoming the director of pediatric rehabilitation services. Connor remained CEO of Flynn Pharmaceuticals, but restructured his schedule to ensure he was home for dinner most nights. Together, they established a foundation focused on making physical therapy and rehabilitation services accessible to underserved communities. 3 years after their wedding, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, who would grow up understanding both the privilege of their father's success and the value of their mother's compassion. Their home became a place where different worlds met harmoniously. Pharmaceutical executives and hospital staff, business tycoons and physical therapists, all gathering around the same table. And sometimes, when charity galas and hospital functions brought them back to that ballroom, Connor and Flora would find their way to the spots where they'd first seen each other, sharing a private smile at the memory of that first electric glance, the moment when she met eyes with a stranger across the room, not knowing the CEO watching her would soon love her completely.